Every capital city on earth is actually sending you a message. It's a secret language of power, and once I show you how to read it, you will realize that space is one of the most dangerous political tools ever invented. In this video, I'm gonna take you behind the walls of the world's most famous capitals. I'll show you the four traps that new countries fall into when they try to build an identity out of concrete, and how those same buildings can end up tearing a country apart. Also, I'm gonna take you inside the minds of history's most famous dictators to show you how they use stone and shadow to brainwash their own people. And finally, we are gonna face those creepy monuments left behind by leaders who are long gone. What do we do with them? Do we bulldoze the scars of the past? Or do we learn to live inside them? So stick around and don't forget to tap the subscribe button before we diving in, because at the end of this journey, you will never look at any building the same way again. Let's decode the city. Have you ever walked into a city square and suddenly felt insignificant? Or stood at the foot of a government building, looking up at giant stone columns and felt like you were entering a temple rather than an office? That feeling is not an accident, it is a very calculated design. We tend to look at buildings as simple piles of bricks, glass, and cement. But if you look closer, you'll realize that every capital city is actually speaking to you. For example, the White House or the US Capitol. Those white columns are not just there to hold up the roof. They are mimicking ancient Greek and Roman temples to shout democracy and stability without saying a word. And yeah, probably you already heard something about the next example. It is North Korea and its capital, Pyongyang. Actually, Pyongyang is essentially the embodiment of power and architecture. Look at the massive empty squares. Of course, they are not designed for a Sunday walk. They are built to be so wide that the individual human being disappears, making you feel that the state is everything and you are basically nothing. The other example is Reichstag dome in Berlin, made of glass, so the people can literally look down on their politicians. A desperate architectural promise of transparency after a dark history. Or look at the Anıtkabir in Ankara. For those who don't know, it is the capital city of Turkey. This monumental building, standing on a hill like a modern secular shrine, declares that power belongs to the nation, not a sultan. So you see, the capital cities have two jobs. The first job is boring, it's functional. They need to house the government machinery. But the second job is what we are here to talk about today. It is symbolic. Architecture is one of the most powerful propaganda tools in history. Regimes use architecture to legitimize themselves. They take an invisible, abstract idea like the state or the revolution and turn it into stone. They carve their power into the skyline so that it feels inevitable, unshakable, and permanent. The width of a boulevard, the height of a dome, or the location of the statue tells us exactly how a regime views its citizens. Are we meant to be participants? Are we meant to be spectators? Or are we meant to be subjects? So is space political? You bet it is. And once you learn to read this language, you will probably never look at the city the same way again. On the other hand, building a capital is not just about showing off power. It's about answering the single most terrifying question. Who are we? Imagine you just founded a new country. You have a flag, an anthem, and a seat at the United Nations. Now you have to build a city that represents everyone or the majority. And according to Professor Lawrence Vale, this is where most governments panic. They fall into what he calls four traps of nationalism. It's like a personality test for the countries, but it's not the multiple choice. It's carved into a stone. The first trap is sub-nationalism. This happens when a country is full of different people, different religions, different ethnicities, but the capital city decides to only look like one of them. For example, Sri Lanka. The parliament building was designed to look like a traditional temple of the majority group. Now, if you are a part of the majority, you look at it and feel pride. But what about if you are in minority? You look at your own capital and realize, I don't think I am actually welcome here. It's a building that claims to unite the nation while silently tearing it apart. Then there is the second trap, the invented history. This is the favorite tool of dictators that feel insecure. If your current regime lacks of the legitimacy, you simply skip over the recent past and link yourself directly to the ancient glory. Saddam Hussein was the master of this. He didn't just want to be the president of Iraq, he wanted to be the successor to the kings of all. So he literally started rebuilding the ancient city of Babylon, stamping his own name onto the bricks right next to the name of Nebuchadnezzar. Mussolini did the exact same thing in Rome, bulldozing medieval neighborhoods to expose ancient ruins, trying to convince Italians that fascism was just the Roman Empire Part 2. Yeah, it is history, but it is fake history. It is weaponized to make a regime feel eternal. The third trap is display. This is pure ego. It is like the architectural equivalent of shouting. So it is like saying, please take me seriously. You can see this in young or insecure nations that build massive, oversized structures that have no real function other than to be big. It's not about needing the space, it is about intimidation. It's a desperate attempt to prove to the world and to probably themselves that they are powerful enough to dominate the landscape. And finally, the fourth and the saddest trap, isolation. What happens when a government is afraid of its own people? They build a fortress. Look at Brasilia in Brazil. It was designed as a modernist utopia, a city of the future, but in practice, it's a city designed for airplanes and cars, not for human beings. The government district is miles away from where the regular people live, separated by massive highways that are impossible to cross on foot. It shields politicians from the massive realities of protests and daily life. It's a capital city that says, we will rule you, but we don't want to touch you. And now let's talk about the villains, because if you want to know more about the dark side of the architecture, you have to look at the dictators. Nobody understood the psychological power of stone better than the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century. As an example, Adolf Hitler and his architect Albert Speer. They didn't just want to rebuild Berlin, they wanted to transform it into Germania or Germania, the capital of the world. Their centerpiece was a building called Volkshalle, or the People's Hall. Imagine a dome so colossal that the Eiffel Tower could fit inside it. It was designed to hold 180,000 people. But here is the terrifying detail: the design wasn't meant to make those people feel comfortable. It was engineered to make the individual feel like an ant. When he stood inside that hole, crushed by the sheer scale of the space, you weren't supposed to feel like a person anymore. You were just a tiny cell in a giant body of the state. Mussolini did the same thing in Italy. He dreamed of a third Rome. He dreamed stripping away the medieval city to build wide, cold avenues and square colosseums, a fascist aesthetic designed to intimidate. But here is where it gets complicated. What does a democracy look like? When we think of democratic capitals, we like to think they are different, welcoming, human scale, and free. But are we sure about it? For example, look at Washington, D.C. It is the capital of republic founded on freedom. Yet, if you look at the National Mall, you see massive white monuments, strict symmetry, and white imperial axes. Honestly, it borrows the exact same language of power as Rome or Versailles. It's grand, it's imposing, it says we are an empire. This creates a paradox. Democracies want to project strength, but they also need to show that power belongs to the people. How they built democracy? After World War II, West Germany tried a radical experiment. They chose a small, boring university town called Bonn as their capital. They didn't build palaces, they built modest, low-rise offices. They didn't use stone walls, they used glass. Lots of it. The idea was transparency. If the people can see inside the government cannot hide anything. It was a desperate attempt to say, we are not like the Nazis, we are open and modest. But it forces us to ask a difficult question. Should a democracy be modest, or does it need to grant monuments to inspire us? Is glass enough to prove a government is transparent, or Is it just a different kind of mask? Now, let's bring this closer to a specific example. If you want to understand how a state builds a new identity from scratch, you have to look at Ankara. For centuries, the heart of the region was Istanbul, a city of glorious imperial palaces and the seat of the Islamic Caliphate. So, when the modern Turkish Republic was founded in 1923, the logical choice would have been to keep the capital there, but they didn't. Instead, they moved the capital to a small, dusty town in the middle of the dry Anatolian steppe. Why? Because Istanbul was too much. It was too full of the past, too heavy with the memory of the Ottoman Empire. The founders wanted a blank slate, a tabula rasa. Ankara was not just a new location. It was designed as the absolute antithesis to Istanbul. If Istanbul was complex, religious, and imperial, Ankara was going to be rational, secular, and national. You can see this battle for identity in the city's very design. First, look at the Ulus Square. In the Ottoman world, this center was defined by the Sultan's palace or the Grand Mosque. But in Ankara, the center was defined by a public square and the statue, specifically the Victory Monument. It told the citizen the state is no longer owned by a monarch appointed by God. It is owned by the nation, represented by this bronze figure. Then they built a completely new district called Yenişehir, literally means the new city. This wasn't just an urban expansion, it was a social laboratory. It was a stage set constructed to teach the public how to be modern. The plan is built wide, European-style boulevards, opera houses, and parks where men and women could socialize together in public. The architecture was forcing the people to rehearse a new Western lifestyle every single day. And finally, look at the skyline. In traditional Ottoman cities, the skyline is dominated by minarets and domes. But in the early plans for Ankara, mosques were intentionally pushed to the background or left out the main vistas. Instead, the most prominent structures were secular temples, like schools, government ministries, and the ethnography museum, which stood high on a hill. The message was clear. Science, history, and a state were the new guides for society. Regimes don't last forever. Empires crumble, dictators fall, but they're concrete and stone that usually survives. And this brings us to the final and perhaps the most difficult question. What do we do with the ghosts they leave behind? When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, Germany faced a crisis. It wasn't just a political, it was architectural. Half the country was filled with buildings designed by a regime that no longer existed. This sparked what we call memory wars. On one side you have the erasers. They argue that these buildings are scars. They remind us of pain, surveillance, and oppression. We saw this happen in Berlin. The massive Palace of the Republic, the seat of the East German Parliament, was demolished. It was erased from the map to make a way for a replica of an old Prussian palace. It was an attempt to physically delete 40 years of history, as if they never happened. But then there's the other side, the preservers. They argue that if you erase the evidence, you forget the lesson. We must keep these ugly buildings because they are ugly. They force us to remember what went wrong. There's no better example of this complicated relationship than in Warsaw, Poland. Domineering over the city's skyline is a massive skyscraper called the Palace of Culture and Science. It was a gift from Joseph Stalin in the 1950s. For decades, the people of Warsaw hated it. It was a symbol of Soviet domination, a daily reminder that they were not truly free. It was alien, it was oppressive. When communism collapsed, many Poles wanted to blow it up. It seemed like a logical final act of their revolution, but they didn't. Why? Because over time, strange things happened. The meaning of the building shifted. It became a landmark. It became a meeting point for teenagers. It became the backdrop for concerts and markets. The gift from Stalin became simply the palace. Today it is still there, illuminated at night, surrounded by modern glass skyscrapers. It stands as a complicated survivor. It proves that we can conquer the past not by destroying it, but by living in it, repurposing it, and making it our own. So, do we tear them down or do we let them stand? There's no easy answer. But every time we walk past these stone walls, they ask us to remember. So, governments are gonna use architecture to make their power feel inevitable. However, the ultimate power doesn't belong to the architect or politician. It belongs to the people walking in the street, deciding for themselves what the space means.